on the World Wide Web, we will have websites. These websites are located inside web servers, right? But first, you might want to discuss about how do we actually create a website. The process includes one, buying a domain name, right? This is how people identify you on the World Wide Web, right? And then two, getting a hosting site. This is where you put your files on the World Wide Web, right? So basically, there are service providers that offers you these services, meaning you buy a domain name from them, right? What they'll do is they'll do some kind of system things with the domain name, right? So that you have an address over on the internet, over on the World Wide Web, sorry, right? And then you buy some hosting space. This is in order for you to put your files, right? So if you remember from earlier, we had something like this, home, and then all of these files inside your website. So we have all of these things. So you have to put them somewhere. You cannot put it inside your computer. If you put it inside your computer, you have to bear in mind that what happens that there might be hundreds of thousands of users and clients that want to access your files. So if you put it inside your computer has to be able to process these requests. In which case, a lot of computers are not regular computers, personal computers. So we make use of a server to do that for us, right? So we have to engage and purchase some space on a hosting site, right? So this whole domain name and hosting is we just call it generically as a web server, meaning to say that using our client-side software, which is web browser, for example Google Chrome, we access these services by going to a web server. Now, domain name and hosting. What happens here is that first, the service provider will give us some space to save our files, and then some kind of interface that we can play around with so that we can have our proper web pages. Now, aside from that, hosting needs to be connected with the domain name. So that is done by our service provider as well, right? You will actually connect it, meaning to say that you want, when people type a certain URL in the address bar, you want them to be able to access your files. So they link it, right? Then they link the domain name to something else called the IP address. But we'll get to that later. Okay. Examples of service providers that provide these kinds of service, you can check it out. For example, we have companies like GoDaddy, right? You can try and search that, GoDaddy.com, right? And homegrown will be Exabytes. You can try and check that out as well. Exabytes.com. You can just try and check that out and see what this whole building a website is all about. Or if you want to try out this without trying this, meaning you don't want to go to a pay site yet, you can actually try Weebly.com. So it's one of those sites that actually provide hosting for free. But for the domain name, it has to have something.weebly.com. That's of course, because if you want an exclusive domain name, you have to pay. Right. Anyway, this whole thing costs around, I think the basic basic package would be around 200 ringgit. $200 per day, per week, per month? No, it's 200 ringgit per year. And with 200 ringgit per year, you can actually open a store online. So you see how this is making much sense. This is making a lot of sense, which is why a lot of people will opt to do something on the World Wide Web because it's just so cheap, 200 ringgit for a year instead of opening a real store. Now, for 200 ringgit, you get support for a year, but of course, the package differs. It's like, for example, a full package of, let's say, how many gigs of storage space and how many people can go to your website. Let's say, for example, 1 million visitor a day or 1 million visitor an hour, for example. That means you have to pay more to the service providers. If you have a basic package, meaning it might be, for example, 1,000 visitors per minute or 10,000 per hour, for example, right? And limit of files exchange of, let's say, 2 gigs per month or 10 gigs per month, something like that, right? So for a premium package where you can have more people and speedier access and more space to save your files, you have to pay more, just so you know. Now, back to this domain name and IP thing. Now, imagine if we want to go to a certain website, you have to type in the address. Hopefully you still remember the IP address, 0 dot something something something, right? Basically it's 4 numbers divided by dots, right? A minimum of 000, maximum of 255, right? So if you have to remember numbers like that, it will be not much interest, you won't have not much interest to actually go to websites. So in our case, we actually know domain names, worldwideweb.facebook.com, worldwideweb.youtube.com. On the other hand, computers, which made up the internet, locate files and resources based on IP addresses. It's hard for them to locate using a domain name, using a text, right? Or rather, they locate other computers, which can be servers and etc., using domain names, right? So what happens is that to be able to access resources online, your service provider, not these service providers, a different kind of service provider, PM, right? For example, service provider that provides access to internet will have to translate your domain name that you type into IP addresses. So this is done using a domain name server, right? So that is what happens when you go to a website. Basically, you type a domain name, it gets translated into IP address, then your service provider can go and search for that particular domain or rather that particular computer inside a certain server provided by certain companies within the internet, right? So that is how you access a website. Now, if you own a website, on the other hand, right, what happens is that you can put different things on your website. Now, this is why the web is otherwise known as a distributed hypermedia system. Distributed hypermedia. That means, for example, if you want pictures, you can go to Flickr or Tumblr. If you want text, you can go to WordPress or Blogspot. If you want videos, you can go to YouTube. If you want sound, you can go to Audio Cloud or something, right? That means it is hypermedia. There are lots of different media, and it is distributed. It's not on one website, right? And it's a whole system of that. And the current World Wide Web is what we call Web 2.0. That means all of us can collaborate and provide content. Now, previously, Web 1.0 is where only website owners can put content online. But now it's not the case, isn't it? Meaning you can go to Facebook, write something on your wall, and you can actually say, I want this to be public, meaning anyone at all can actually see my writing. That is providing content. You can comment on a YouTube video, and everyone in the world can see it. That is providing content. So that is Web 2.0. All users can potentially provide content, and so we can collaborate, we can work with each other to achieve something, right? So more on World Wide Web, or rather one part of the World Wide Web, which is very important, which is the search engines.